Paul has 117 quarters and dimes. So we don't know how many of each he has, right? He could have 100 quarters and 17 dimes. He could have whatever. They have to add up to 117, the number of quarters and the number of dimes, right? But altogether, the amount he has is worth a total of $15.75. We have to figure out how many of each coin does he have. So when you don't know something in math, when there's an unknown, what do you use to represent an unknown? A variable. So let's say, let x represent what? What are we trying to find here? How many of each coin does he have? So what are we trying to find? What's unknown? So let x represent number of quarters he has. Like I said, maybe he has 100 quarters, then he would have to have 17 dimes, right? And let y represent the number of what? Of dimes. Okay? So you have to come up with two equations in order to solve this. Altogether, however many quarters and however many dimes, we know altogether he has 117 coins. What would be your first equation to show that? To show the total number of coins. Yes? X, the amount of quarters I have, plus the amount of dimes I have, altogether I have 117 coins. This is your first equation. In order to solve this, we have to use the other piece of information. We know that the total amount of money I have in my hand is $15.75. That's the total amount of money. How do you calculate the cost or the amount of something you have? If I have a quarter in my hand, let's say I had 2 quarters. How much money do I have in my hand? 50 cents, right? How did you calculate that? You did what? What's the amount of a quarter? What's a quarter worth? 25 cents. And then what did you do? If I had 2 quarters in my hand, how would you calculate the amount I have? You would do 25 cents times 2, right? So we don't know how many quarters, so it's going to be times x. 25 cents times however many quarters I have. Does that make sense? If I had 50 quarters, well, if I want to know how much that's worth, I would do 25 cents times 50, right? The x represents the number of quarters. But then I have to also add the dimes I have. How much is a dime worth? So 0.10, right? Do I know how many dimes I have? So what do I multiply that by if I don't know? Why? The number of dimes. This is our second equation. Now that you've come up with the 2 equations, we are going to solve by, we can do elimination or we can do substitution. Do you remember this? Let's do substitution. Let's solve this by substitution. Okay, this is on your exam. Do you remember how to solve by substitution? So the first step is you have to rearrange one of the equations to isolate a variable. Should we isolate a variable from this equation, or should you isolate a variable from that equation? Which one's easier to isolate a variable, equation 1 or equation 2? Equation 1. What do you want to isolate, x or y? X? Okay, so x is equal to 117. What do I do with this plus y? Becomes minus y. That's the first step in substitution, right? Isolate a variable. Now that I know what x is equal to 117 minus y, we're going to take that and we're going to plug it in where I have x in the second equation, and then we're going to solve it. Do you remember doing this now? X plus y equals 117. Well, if we know that y is 90, can you find x? So I'm taking this is what x is equal to, and I'm replacing it into the equation. So instead of writing 0.25 times x, I'm going to write 0.25 times what? 117 minus y. You're replacing x. Do you remember this? Plus 0.10 y equals 1575. So now we only have y in the equation, so we can actually solve for y. That's what you're trying to find. You're trying to figure out x and y. Y represented the number of dimes. I'm trying to figure out what that answer is. How do I solve this? We have to take this and multiply it first. Remember we did this yesterday? So what's 0.25 times 117? 29.25, and then 0.25 times negative y would be negative 0.25y. Then we have the plus 0.10y equals 1575. We need to separate our variables, our like terms, put them together. So I have my negative 0.25y plus 0.10y. What does that equal to when you simplify that? What's negative 0.25 plus 0.10? What do you got? Negative 0.15y. Okay, that's equal to 1575, but what about this? Plus 29.25. What does that become when I move it to the other side? Negative 29.25. Can you simplify this? We're left with this negative 0.15y on the left side, and we do 15.75, take away 29.25 on the right side. What do you get? What is it? Negative 11.7. Am I done? I'm trying to figure out what y equals. What's the last step to isolate y? What do I have to do to both sides? I'm trying to isolate y. I'm trying to get this y by itself. Divide by. Okay, so that should have been negative 13.5. When you subtract these two, you get negative 13.5, right? Now what do I do to isolate y? Divide by negative 0.15. Divide by negative 0.15. That reduces to 1. What's this? Negative 13.5 divided by negative 0.15. What do you get when you divide those two? 90. Does that make sense? What did y represent? Quarters or dimes? So therefore, Paul has 90 dimes, but we need to know how many quarters he has. Do you remember the original equation? It's subtract, good. Right? X plus y equals 117. I need to know x. I know now that y is 90. So x has to be equal to 117 minus 90, right? What's x equal to? 27. So therefore, Paul has 90 dimes and how many quarters? 27 quarters. Does that make sense?